So the Prime Minister promised that we would get inflation down to half by the end of the year. Do you think this shows he can now do it?
Well, this is a very, very welcome news today. We're now down to 6.8%, well over 1% down. We're at the lowest level we have been since February last year. It wasn't going to be easy. None of the Prime Minister's pledges are going to be easy, but we are focused on taking all those decisions as a government to get us down to half what it was at the start of the year.
It's still, though, 6 times the Bank of England target of 2%, isn't it? When do you think we might reach that benchmark?
Well, the Bank of England themselves think that we're on course to get to 5% by the end of the year and then get to 3% by this time next year. And we're on course then to get to 2% target by 2025. But as I say, this isn't a sort of straight line process. You know, there are lots of factors that go into the inflation figures. And that's why the government, working very closely with the Bank of England, are very determined by the decisions we make around public spending, around pay settlements, around not allowing more expenditure to be made to keep focused on this target. Getting inflation down is the most important thing the government can do to lay the foundations for enduring and strong growth.
I mean, you say that there's work still to be done because, you know, as inflation falls, we're seeing wages going up and we're seeing, you know, interest rates go up. People are not actually feeling any better off yet, are they? People are still really, really struggling with the cost of living.
Well, as we saw with the wage data yesterday, it is higher. And what we've got to try and do is get to a point where we get rid of inflation and see high wage, high productivity economy and faster growth. The IMF are very positive about the growth for the UK economy when we get to the end of next year. We've seen stronger growth than many of our competitors and neighbours in Europe over the last 13 years. We had the strongest growth in the G7 last year. But this isn't easy when you have high inflation, and lots of economies have got high inflation. And as I say, it means that sometimes you've got to take tough decisions because you can't spend as much money, can't borrow as much, unlike the opposition who are very unclear about what they will borrow.
Do you think that the wage rises that we saw yesterday will lead to a more hefty rise in interest rates than we perhaps have seen?
Well, obviously, it's the Bank of England's decision on interest rates, and we're very clear that that must be their decision. They've got some tough decisions to make because obviously the data points move around quite a lot, and there's a lag in terms of the effect of the decisions they make. But we will work in lockstep with them, and they will make those decisions. I think their next decision is around the middle of September.
Let's just touch on rail prices because, of course, this particular set of figures are important because it's what the government uses to then determine next year's rail prices. You're not going to use RPI.
Below inflation. And obviously I'll be working closely with Mark Harper, the Secretary of State, on what mechanism to use. But there are involving tough decisions there around, how to use his budget in a way that, it suits the commuters and suits the economy as a whole. Delicate, difficult decisions. We haven't come to the end of that discussion yet.
So below inflation, below the 9% RPI or below the 6.8%?
We'll make those announcements in due course. I'm not going to make them this morning.
You last year pegged it to wage growth, but of course that's at 7.8%, and that would be incredibly high.
Well, as I say, discussions are ongoing with Mark Harper. What we have said is that we won't be having a rate that's higher than inflation, but the details of that will be for him to announce in due course.
Why can't you freeze it? The Liberal Democrats are calling for it to be frozen this year, saying that along with the cost of living, along with food prices, it's incredibly hard for families, it's incredibly hard for working families. Wouldn't freezing train prices this year help people?
Well, the thing is, when you're in opposition, you can say lots of things that are very attractive. When you're in government, you've got to take tough decisions within the envelopes of expenditure that we have. I think some of our political opponents, especially the Liberal Democrats, wanted us to subsidise mortgages a few months ago. Again, that was uncosted and wouldn't actually deal with the fact that we've got to have spending plans that add up. So, as I say, we are looking at what we can do on commuting costs, and that's something that the Secretary of State for Transport will make an announcement on in due course.
It's not just the opposition, though. It's campaigners for transport campaigners are also pushing for a freeze on train fares. I mean, they've had.
I would expect them to be doing that. But as a government minister, what I've got to do is make sure that when we've set a budget for 3 years as Chief Secretary, that we hold to that budget. Because if we don't, we will have inflationary pressures. And we've seen today that inflation has fallen to a level now that it's its lowest since February last year. That isn't That doesn't happen by magic. It happens by deliberate action by government ministers holding on to government budgets, working very closely to take out inefficiencies and waste and ensure that we keep that pressure down on inflation. Getting inflation down is the most important thing for the British people, and that's what this government is committed to doing.
It is, of course, one of Rishi Sunak's 5 targets at the beginning of the year. He may well achieve it, but what about the other 4?
Well, as I said last week when I was doing the round on the GDP figures, a lot's changed since the start of the year. At the start of the year, people were expecting a recession. We're not facing that now. We're not complacent at all. And when we get to the end of the year, we will then, and I'm sure he will want to report back on the 5 pledges that he's made at the centre of his strategy and aims for this year in government.
Apart of those 5 pledges, apart from stopping the boats, polls show that Keir Starmer is trusted to solve the other 4 problems more than the Prime Minister is. I mean, do you accept that the next government will be a Labour one?
No, I don't at all. What I accept is that the legacy of COVID, of the war in Ukraine, has given our economy some real shocks that take tough action to deal with, to get inflation down, to set those foundations for growth, to ensure that debt is falling. And we are working as a government in a very united, disciplined fashion to deliver on those 5 pledges. My job is not to worry about the opinion polls, but to do the right thing for the country, and that's what I'm doing week in, week out.
OK, final question before we go. It's been reported that Rishi Sunak attended a Taylor Swift concert on his holidays. Government sources won't confirm or deny, but they're not denying it. There have been lots of big acts touring this year. Have you had a chance to go to any concerts? And if not, which one would you have gone to? No,
I haven't been to any. I just went to watch my local football match, Salisbury. I'm glad they won 3-2 against Swindon Supermarines last night. That was the highlight of my summer activity so far.
And how do you think the Lionesses are going to do?
I think they do really well. I think the whole nation's going to get behind them, building on the Euro success last year. I think everyone's going to be watching at 11 o'clock this morning, and we look forward, I hope, to the final the weekend.
John Glen, thanks very much for
coming. Thank you.